The dregs of the solstice feast lay scattered across the great hall. Gnawed bones, overturned goblets, the cloying scent of spilled wine and pine boughs. Brenna moved through the chaos, a ghost in a drab wool dress, her purpose simple: to be unseen. Unseen, unheard, untouched. For a shiftless girl in a hall of alphas, touch was a dangerous currency. She gathered pewter plates, her movements swift and silent, her eyes downcast. She knew the map of this room by its sounds: the boisterous laugh of her cousin Lysandra holding court near the hearth, the low murmur of the king's council, the unnerving silence that surrounded the throne itself. King Valerius did not celebrate, he presided. A figure carved from winter granite, his grief a palpable chill that even the roaring fire could not warm. It had been 5 years since the death of his mate, and the silence in his soul had become the law of the land. Brenna risked a glance. He was staring into the flames, his profile sharp and unforgiving, his presence a void around which all other life cautiously orbited. A drunken lord stumbled backward, colliding with a serving boy. The boy yelped, a cascade of crystal goblets crashing from his tray. The sound was a whip crack in the relative lull. Shards skittered across the stone floor. One of them sliced through the worn leather of Brenna's boot, a sharp, sudden bite at her ankle. She hissed, dropping her stack of plates with a clatter that drew every eye in the room. Her carefully constructed invisibility shattered. Lysandra's voice, sweet as poisoned honey, cut through the silence. "Clumsy thing, always dropping what she's given." Heat flooded Brenna's face. She knelt, fumbling to gather the mess, her fingers trembling. A shadow fell over her. She froze, smelling ozone and cold mountain air, the unique scent of the king's power. She did not look up. To meet an alpha's eyes uninvited was a challenge, and to meet this king's eyes was suicide. "Leave it," a low voice commanded. The words were not unkind, merely absolute. She should have obeyed. She should have scuttled away like the vermin her pack had always called her. But a piece of crystal lay perilously close to his immaculate boot, and the ingrained habit of service, of smoothing the way for others, was too strong. She reached for it. At the exact same moment, he bent down. It was an accident, a confluence of mismatched intentions. His fingers, long and cool, brushed against the back of her hand. It was not a spark, it was an inferno. A white-hot agony shot up her arm, a branding iron searing a path straight to her heart. A cry was torn from her throat, raw and animalistic. But it was not her sound alone. A guttural snarl echoed hers, ripped from the chest of the king. He recoiled as if burned, his silver eyes blown wide with a shock that mirrored her own. The world went silent. The air crackled, thick with a power that had no place here, no place in her. It was the snap of a fated bond locking into place, a sacred, primal magic that only happened between an alpha and their chosen. A magic that was impossible for a girl who had no wolf, no shift, nothing but a hollow space where her soul should be. The king stared at his hand, then at her, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. In his eyes, she saw her own terror reflected. This was not a blessing. For the grieving king and the shiftless girl, it was a cage. A shared sentence pronounced by a cruel and silent God. The bond, a thing of legend and song, felt only like a shackle, cold and heavy and absolute, chaining the most powerful man in the kingdom to the one person who had nothing. The air in the northern keep was thin and sharp, tasting of iron and ice. It scoured Brenna's lungs with every breath, a constant reminder of how far she was from everything she had ever known. The king's fortress, Blackcrag, was a spear of dark stone thrusting into a perpetually gray sky. It was less a home than a monument to solitude. It suited him. Valerius had not spoken to her since that night. He had not looked at her. He had simply issued a decree, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. And she had been bundled into a carriage, her meager possessions in a sack at her feet. She was his bonded, a fact whispered with horror and fascination through the court. But here, in his own domain, she was less than a ghost. She was an inconvenience. Gerda, the keep's castellan, a woman whose face seemed carved from the same hard stone as the fortress, had met her at the gates. Her eyes, the color of a winter lake, had assessed Brenna with a brutal lack of sentiment. "The king has given no orders for your placement," she had said, her voice raspy. "The queen's chambers are sealed. They will remain so." The implication was clear. Brenna was a consort in name only, a biological anomaly to be hidden away. "The kennels, then," Brenna had said, her own voice quiet but steady. "I am useful with the hounds." Gerda's eyebrow had risen a fraction of an inch. A flicker of something, surprise, respect, had crossed her features before being suppressed. "As you wish." And so Brenna found her place at the bottom of the world, among the wolves. Not the shifters of the king's guard, but the great gray beasts used for hunting and tracking. Here, the air was ripe with the smell of fur and cedar shavings and clean animal musk. It was a relief from the sterile, silent halls of the keep. Here, things were simple. Hakon, the kennel master, was a mountain of a man with a beard like rusted wire and a scowl that seemed permanent. He'd grunted when Gerda introduced her, tossing her a worn leather apron. "Don't get in the way, don't get bit. Clean the runs." Brenna did not get in the way. She did not get bit. She cleaned the runs until her hands were raw and her back ached. The repetitive work a balm to her frayed nerves. The wolves, massive creatures with intelligent yellow eyes, watched her. They did not snarl or shy away. They observed her with a calm curiosity that the shifters of her old pack had never shown. They seemed to sense the quiet place inside her, the void that others found so unnerving, and they were not afraid. In the farthest corner of the kennels, in a pen lined with extra straw, was a pup. He was the runt of a recent litter, his fur the color of ash and soot, his breathing a shallow, rattling thing. Hakon had looked at the pup with a grim sort of pity. "He won't last the winter. The mother has already pushed him out." Brenna felt a pull toward the small, shivering creature. It was a familiar ache, the kinship of the discarded. She started spending her evenings by his pen, long after her duties were done. She didn't touch him at first. She just sat, letting him grow used to her scent. She murmured to him soft, meaningless sounds. The rattling in his chest seemed to ease when she was near. One night, emboldened by the pup's weak tail thump against the straw, she reached a hand through the bars. He whined, a thin, pathetic sound, but he didn't pull away. He nudged his damp nose into her palm. As her skin met his fur, she felt it, the familiar, strange sensation that had made her an outcast. It was not a surge of power, but the opposite, a drawing in, a quietening. She could feel the frantic, frightened beat of his tiny heart, the feverish heat of his body, and she instinctively pulled the chaos into the stillness inside her. The pup's shivering subsided. He let out a long, shaky sigh and leaned his full weight into her hand, falling into a deep, peaceful sleep. From the shadows at the far end of the kennels, King Valerius watched. He had come seeking the one place that had always brought him a measure of peace, the uncomplicated company of his wolves. He had not expected to find her there. He saw the firelight glinting off her bent head, the gentle way she spoke to the dying pup. He saw the moment of contact, and he felt it. Through the agonizing, unwanted bond that connected them, he felt a faint echo of that quiet, a single drop of peace in the raging ocean of his grief. It was startling, and it was terrifying. He retreated back into the shadows, his silence once more his shield, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. The stillness inside Brenna had always been her curse. In a world that celebrated the wild, vibrant spirit of the wolf, she was a vacuum. Other children had burst with untamed energy, their phantom tails wagging, their senses sharp. Brenna had been born with a profound and unnerving quiet. When other shifters were near her, they felt less. Their inner wolves grew sluggish, their instincts dulled. They looked at her and saw a thief, a creature who stole the most essential part of their nature. She did not just lack a wolf, she seemed to swallow the very essence of theirs. Her parents had regarded her with a mixture of shame and fear. Her cousin Lysandra had been the one to name the curse. "She's a Null," she'd declared with the casual cruelty of a child who knows her own power. "She makes everyone empty, just like her." The name had stuck. Brenna the Null. But the animals in the forest had not found her empty. They had sought her out. A fawn with a broken leg had limped to her and laid its head in her lap. A hawk with a torn wing had allowed her to tend to it without a single peck. They did not feel diminished by her presence. They felt safe. She was a refuge from pain, a harbor in the storm of their fear. Here at Blackcrag, it was the same. The great hunting wolves, usually aloof and wary of strangers, would rest their massive heads on her knee as she sat by the fire. Hakon watched it all with his narrowed, suspicious eyes. He saw how the most aggressive male, a scarred brute named Fang, became as docile as a pup when Brenna was near. "What magic is this?" he demanded one afternoon, his voice a low rumble. He gestured with his chin toward Fang, who was letting Brenna pluck a burr from the sensitive fur behind his ear. "No magic," she answered honestly. "I am just calm." Hakon grunted, unconvinced. But he stopped watching her with hostility and started watching her with a grudging curiosity. He saw how she coaxed the sickly pup, Soot she'd named him, to take a few sips of broth. He saw the pup, who should have been dead weeks ago, was now strong enough to stand on his wobbly legs. A new presence entered her quiet world. A small boy, no older than 6, with hair the color of straw and eyes as wide and blue as a summer sky. He was one of the keep's wards, an orphan of some border skirmish. His name was Pip. He appeared one day at the kennel door, a wooden sword clutched in his hand, and simply stared at her. The other servants shushed him and tried to pull him away. "Don't bother the Null," they whispered, the cruel name having followed her even here. But Pip did not seem to find her unnerving. He watched her with the solemn intensity of childhood. Finally, he marched up to her as she was mixing feed. "Are you the sad lady?" he asked, his voice high and clear. Brenna paused, a spoonful of mash halfway to the bucket. "Am I?" "Gerda says you're the king's bonded, and the king is the sad king, so you must be the sad lady." He announced this as if it were an irrefutable law of physics. A small, wry smile touched Brenna's lips for the first time in months. "I suppose I am." From that day on, Pip was her shadow. He chattered endlessly, filling the quiet of the kennels with his stories and questions. He was not afraid of her stillness. He seemed to bask in it. He would sit beside her while she tended to Soot, offering the pup his wooden toys. "Soot needs a sword to fight the sickness," he would say with great seriousness. Through Pip's innocent prattling, Brenna began to piece together a portrait of the king she never saw. "King Valerius doesn't smile because his smile lives with the Ghost Queen now," Pip explained one day. "He built her a garden of white roses, but now it's all thorns." He told her how the king would walk the battlements for hours, even in the fiercest storms, a solitary figure against the raging sky. "He doesn't turn into a wolf anymore," Pip whispered, his voice full of awe and sorrow. "Hakon says his wolf died when the queen died." The word struck a chord deep inside Brenna. A shifter who doesn't shift. An alpha king, the most powerful of their kind, whose grief was so profound it had severed him from his own wolf. She understood that kind of amputation. She understood that kind of emptiness. The bond between them remained, a thin, taut wire of awareness. She could feel him in the castle, a distant storm of grief and rage. And he, she knew, could feel her. Sometimes, late at night, when the keep was silent, she would press her hand to her own chest and focus on the stillness within her, pushing it out along that invisible thread, a silent offering of peace she was sure he never accepted. She was not a queen. She was not a mate. She was an anchor, perhaps, for a man who had forgotten he even owned a ship. And she was beginning to realize that her curse might be the only thing that could ever truly reach him. The first snows came, thick and heavy, blanketing the world in white and sealing Blackcrag from the outside world. The silence of the keep deepened, muffled by the falling snow. For Brenna, little changed. Her days were a rhythm of work and quiet companionship with the animals and Pip. The pup, Soot, was thriving. His coat was thick and dark, his legs sturdy, his once shallow breaths now even and strong. He was a small, living testament to her strange gift. One evening, seeking refuge from a particularly biting wind, Brenna found her way to the keep's library. It was a place no one seemed to use, a vast, cold room smelling of aging paper and dust. A single fire crackled low in a cavernous hearth. She ran her fingers over the spines of the leather-bound books, her fingertips coming away dusty. She was not looking for stories or poetry. She was looking for answers. Histories of the bond, treatises on shifter lineage, anything that might explain what she was, what this connection to the king meant. She found a heavy tome on alpha lines and settled on a worn bench near the fire, pulling her thin shawl tighter. The script was archaic, the language dense, but she pieced it together. The bond was more than a mating. It was a balancing. An alpha's power, it said, was a raging sun. Their bonded was the moon, a necessary gravity to keep that sun from burning itself out. The text spoke of wolves finding their anchors, their harbors. It never once mentioned a bonded who had no wolf of their own. According to every book she could find, she should not exist. A floorboard creaked behind her. She looked up, her heart leaping into her throat. King Valerius stood in the arched doorway, framed by shadow. He was not dressed for court, but in simple black wool tunic and leggings, attire that made him seem younger, less of a monument and more of a man. His silver eyes were fixed on her. She felt the familiar jolt of the bond, a hum beneath her skin, heightened by his proximity. She started to rise, to curtsy, to make herself small and disappear. "Stay," he said. The word was not a command, but a quiet request. He moved further into the room, his footsteps silent on the stone floor. He did not approach her bench, but went to the hearth, staring down into the flames as he had that night at the feast. The firelight carved harsh lines onto his face. "You read the old tongue," he stated. It wasn't a question. "A little," Brenna admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Brenna's gaze dropped back to the book in her lap, her hands clenched on the cover. She could feel his attention on her, a physical weight. "Have you found what you were looking for?" he asked, his voice low. She knew he wasn't asking about the book's contents. He was asking about them, about the impossible thing that bound them together. She decided on the truth. It was the only thing she had. "No. The books say a bonded must have a wolf to temper the alpha's own. They say I am a myth, a monster." He turned his head, his gaze finally meeting hers across the space. There was no anger in his eyes now, only a profound, weary emptiness. "And what do you say?" The directness of the question surprised her. No one had ever asked for her opinion on her own nature. They had only ever told her what she was. "I say, they are wrong." The words were soft, but they held a core of certainty she hadn't known she possessed. "I do not temper a wolf. I think I offer it a place to rest." Valerius watched her, his expression unreadable. He saw no fear in her, no guile, only a startling, quiet honesty. He had spent 5 years drowning in the rage of his own wolf, a beast chained by grief. He had thought the bond to this girl a final, cruel joke from the fates, a son bonded to a vacuum. But what she said, a place to rest. He felt the truth of it resonate deep within him, a low, solemn chime in the chaos of his soul. He gave a single sharp nod, an acknowledgement of her words. Then, as silently as he had appeared, he turned and left the library, leaving Brenna alone with the fire, the ancient books, and the startling realization that for the first time, someone had seen her curse and had not immediately named it a monstrosity. The silence he left behind was different. It was not empty. It felt like the beginning of a question. The arrival of the royal convoy was a jarring intrusion. The snows had briefly cleared, and a path had been forced through the high passes. With them came Lysandra. She swept into Blackcrag's great hall like a vibrant, predatory bird, her furs a rich sable, her smile as bright and sharp as a shard of ice. She embraced Brenna, a theatrical display of affection for the assembled household. "My dearest cousin," she murmured, her lips close to Brenna's ear, her voice a venomous whisper. "Still playing with the dogs, I see. Some things never change." Lysandra's presence was a constant, low-grade torment. She filled the keep's oppressive silence with her laughter and chatter, charming the guards and even eliciting a rare, thin smile from Gerda. She treated Brenna with a cloying pity that was more insulting than open scorn, constantly referring to her unfortunate condition, while positioning herself as the king's confidant, a true alpha female who could understand his burdens. Brenna retreated further into the quiet world of the kennels. But Lysandra's poison had a long reach. Whispers followed her. The servants began to look at her with renewed fear. The Null is a bad omen. She weakens the king's line. The true crisis came not from whispers, but from a whimper. Soot, who had been growing stronger every day, suddenly collapsed. He lay on his side in the straw, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. A fever raged through his small body, and a tremor ran through his limbs that Brenna's calming presence could not soothe. "It's the spirit fade," Hakon said, his gruff voice laced with a genuine sorrow. "It happens sometimes with the runts. The body grows, but the wolf spirit is too weak to keep up. It's letting go." The keep's healer, a grim-faced man, confirmed it. He offered a potion to ease the pup's passing, nothing more. Brenna refused. She would not let him go. She sat with Soot for a day and a night, pouring her own stillness into him, trying to anchor his flickering spirit. But it was like trying to catch smoke in her hands. He was slipping away. Desperation clawed at her. She had never tried to do more than simply be a calm presence. She had never actively used her gift, had never tried to push it outward, to shape it. Closing her eyes, she laid both hands on the pup's trembling chest. She ignored the heat of his fever, the frantic beat of his heart. Instead, she reached deeper, into the hollow place inside herself, the place where her own wolf should have been. It was not empty. It was quiet. A vast, silent, waiting space. Instead of pulling his pain into her, she did the opposite. She pushed the quiet out. She did not try to nullify his spirit. She tried to call to it, to offer it a sanctuary. "Stay," she thought, the word a silent plea sent from her soul to his. "Rest here. Be still. Be safe." A strange pressure built in the room. The air grew thick, heavy. Through the bond, 1,000 yards away in his solar, Valerius felt it. It was not a call for help. It was a beacon. A profound and utter stillness that cut through the perpetual storm of his grief like a lighthouse beam. It was her. But it was different, stronger, more focused. It was not passive, it was an act of will. He was on his feet before he knew he'd decided to move, drawn by an instinct more powerful than reason. He strode through the keep, his guards scrambling to keep pace. He ignored them, ignored the questioning look from Gerda. He followed the pull, the impossible sense of peace that promised relief from a pain he'd carried for 5 years. He found her in the kennels, kneeling in the straw, her face pale with strain, her hands glowing with a faint silvery light he had never seen before. He saw the dying pup. He saw Hakon and a tearful Pip watching from a helpless distance. He saw the raw power emanating from her, a power that no one, least of all her, understood. He finally understood. She was not a void. She was an anchor. He walked toward her, his boots silent in the straw. She didn't seem to notice his approach, her concentration absolute. He saw the sweat on her brow, the tremor in her own hands. She was giving too much of herself. Without thinking, driven by the instinct to protect the source of this impossible peace, he knelt beside her. He did not speak. He did not touch her skin. He simply placed his large, warm hand over hers where they rested on Soot's chest. The moment his hand covered hers, everything changed. His own immense, suppressed alpha power surged, not into the pup, but into her. It flowed through their joined hands, a current of raw energy, But instead of overwhelming her, her unique gift filtered it, gentled it, shaped his raging power into a focused, healing warmth. The silver light around her hands brightened, infused with gold. Beneath their palms, Soot's tremors ceased. The rattling in his chest eased, his breathing deepening into the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. The fever broke. The pup's spirit, which had been flickering like a dying candle flame, settled and burned steady once more, anchored by the combined, balanced power of the king and his Null. Brenna opened her eyes, exhausted but lucid, and found Valerius kneeling beside her, his hand covering hers, his silver eyes fixed on her face with an expression of raw, unguarded awe. It was the first time he had willingly touched her since the bond had snapped into place, and in that touch there was no pain, no shock, only a deep, resonant hum of rightness, a perfect, impossible balance. Lysandra saw the change in the king. It was subtle, a fractional lessening of the tension in his shoulders, a new stillness in his gaze when he looked at Brenna. He had begun seeking Brenna out, not in the great hall or in public, but in the quiet spaces of the keep, the library, the battlements, the kennels. Their conversations were brief, sparse, yet Lysandra, a student of power, recognized the shift. The king's inconvenience was becoming his confidant. Her own position, so carefully cultivated, was becoming precarious. Jealousy was a sharp, cold thing inside her. She had always been the brilliant one, the powerful one, the alpha female destined for greatness. Brenna was the broken toy, the shame of their bloodline. To be usurped by a Null was an intolerable humiliation. Lysandra decided to remind everyone what Brenna truly was, a danger. She acquired a pouch of powdered shadow root from a disgraced hedge mage. It was a rare, volatile substance that, when inhaled, drove a shifter's inner wolf into a state of uncontrollable paranoid rage. It did not affect humans, nor, she theorized, would it affect the wolfless Brenna. It was the perfect weapon. A royal hunt was declared to celebrate the break in the weather. It was a tradition Valerius had abandoned after his mate's death, and its revival caused a stir. Lysandra insisted Brenna must attend. "You are the king's bonded," she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity in front of the king's council. "You must take your place by his side." Valerius looked at Brenna, his expression a question. He did not command her. He waited. Brenna, feeling the weight of a dozen hostile stares, gave a small nod. To refuse would be seen as weakness, an admission of the fear they all thought she should have. Before the hunt, Lysandra approached Valerius, her face a mask of concern. "Your Majesty, I fear for you," she said, her voice low and urgent. "My cousin... There are stories from our home pack of shifters falling ill in her presence, their spirits weakening. They said her parents were involved with the Southern rebels, the same ones who ambushed your queen." It was a lie, a masterfully crafted poison dart aimed at the heart of his grief. He did not react, his face impassive, but Lysandra saw the flicker of old pain in his eyes and knew the poison had found its mark. The morning of the hunt was cold and bright. The air was crisp, the sky a piercing blue. Brenna felt horribly out of place in the fine, borrowed leathers mounted on a placid mare. The king's guard, a dozen elite shifters, were restless, their energy a thrumming, predatory hum in the air. Valerius rode at the head of the party on a massive black warhorse, his posture rigid, his silence more profound than ever. He had not spoken to her since Lysandra's arrival. The fragile bridge between them had been broken. As they entered the dense woods, Lysandra rode close to the guards, laughing and sharing a wineskin. No one saw her deftly unstopper a small pouch and release a fine, dark powder into the wind, directly into the path of the following riders. The effect was almost instantaneous. A low growl rumbled through the pack of guards. The shifters' eyes, normally sharp and intelligent, began to glaze over with a red, feral light. Their movements grew jerky, their control fraying. One of them, a young guard named Torvin, suddenly snarled, his features distorting as his wolf fought for dominance. Hakon, who had insisted on joining the hunt to watch the horses, saw it first. His eyes narrowed. "My king! The men!" But it was too late. The shadow root had taken hold. With a collective roar, half a dozen of the guards lost control. Their bodies contorted in the violent, agonizing process of an unsanctioned shift. Bones snapped and reformed, skin split to reveal coarse fur. Within seconds, they were no longer men, but monstrous, maddened wolves driven by a paranoid frenzy. They turned on the nearest thing they did not recognize, the thing that felt alien and wrong to their poisoned minds. Brenna's calm, wolfless scent. The forest exploded into chaos. The great wolves lunged, not with the clean precision of a hunt, but with the slavering fury of rabid beasts. Brenna's mare screamed and reared, throwing her to the frozen ground. The air was knocked from her lungs. She looked up into a maelstrom of claws and teeth. Hakon bellowed, drawing a heavy axe from his saddle. He threw himself between Brenna and the frenzied wolves, a lone mountain of a man against a tide of fury.
"Get behind me, girl!"
Valerius was fighting his own battle. The poison had hit him too, stirring the sleeping, grieving beast within him. His wolf, silent for 5 years, roared to life, not with strength, but with pure, undiluted rage. The agony of his loss, the poison of Lysandra's lie, the scent of the maddened wolves, it was all a tidal wave of fury threatening to drown him. He fought it, his knuckles white on the reins, a snarl tearing at his own throat. And then he saw her. Brenna was not cowering. She was not screaming. She was on her feet, her back against a great oak, and she was not alone. Pip, who had secretly followed the hunting party, had run into the clearing, his face white with terror. Brenna had shoved him behind her, spreading her arms to shield him. She was a frail human girl, creating a barrier between a terrified child and a pack of frenzied alphas. She was not using her gift to nullify them. She was focusing it, creating a small, visible bubble of shimmering, calm air around herself and the boy. The maddened wolves shied away from it, snarling and confused, unable to breach that perimeter of profound peace. She was not a void. She was a shield. In that instant, watching her protect the innocent, something inside Valerius broke. Not his control, but the dam of his grief. His choice was absolute. He was a king, yes, but before that, he was an alpha. And his bonded, his anchor, was protecting a child. He threw himself from his horse, landing in a crouch. He did not fight the change. He did not fight his wolf. He surrendered to it, but on his own terms. He let Brenna's calm, which he could feel pulsing across the clearing through their bond, wash over him, anchoring him not in grief, but in purpose. His shift was not the agonizing contortion of the others. It was a fluid, powerful explosion of silver light. He emerged a wolf of impossible size, his fur the color of moonlight on snow, his eyes the pure, burning silver of his human form, but clear and intelligent and utterly in command. He did not join the frenzy, he ended it. A single, booming roar of pure alpha authority echoed through the forest, a sound that shook the very trees. The maddened wolves froze, the poison in their minds overridden by the primal command of their king. They whimpered, their rage draining away, leaving them confused and shivering in their half-shifted forms. Valerius, the great silver wolf, did not spare them another glance. He padded silently across the clearing and stood over Brenna and the boy, placing his massive body between them and the world. He was not a monster. He was not a grieving king. He was a protector. He lowered his head and nudged Brenna's hand with his cold nose, a silent vow, a promise kept. The aftermath was swift and cold as a winter execution. Lysandra, found with the empty pouch of shadowroot, did not confess. She sneered, her ambition curdling into venomous rage as Valerius, flanked by Hakon and his now lucid guards, confronted her in the great hall. "She is a blight!" Lysandra shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Brenna. "A Null who will poison your line and weaken this kingdom! I did it for you! For our kind!" Valerius did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His quiet words fell like stones into a frozen lake. "You threatened my bonded. You endangered a child. You betrayed my trust. You are no longer of my pack or of this kingdom." He stripped her of her rank and titles with a single sentence. Her exile was absolute. To the wolfless southern lands, a fate worse than death for a proud alpha. She was dragged away, still screaming her vitriol, but her words had no power here anymore. The keep settled into a profound quiet. The scandal was over, the danger past, but an unspoken tension remained. The bridge between Brenna and the king had been tested, and neither knew if it still held. Brenna retreated to her small room, the adrenaline leaving her weak and trembling. She had faced down monsters, but this quiet uncertainty was a more terrifying thing. Hours later, a soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Valerius standing there. He was not the king, nor the wolf. He was just a man, his silver eyes shadowed with exhaustion, his shoulders slumped with a weight that seemed older than the mountains. He did not ask to enter. He simply waited. Brenna stepped back, holding the door open. He walked past her into the small Spartan room. He looked at the neatly made bed, the single wooden bird she had carved sitting on the nightstand, the sleeping form of Soot curled on a rug by the cold hearth. "The boy Pip is safe," he said, his voice rough. "Asleep. Gerda gave him a hot milk with honey." "Good," she whispered. He turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw the walls around him completely gone. His face was an open book of pain and regret. "What she said about your family and my mate, Alina," he faltered, the name a ghost on his lips. "I did not believe her, not truly, but the poison, it fed the doubt. For that, I am sorry." He took a breath. "Alina was killed in a border ambush. I was not with her. I was here, arguing with my council over grain tariffs. I told myself my duty was to the throne first. I have lived with that choice every day for 5 years. My wolf, he has never forgiven me. I locked him away with my grief, and I thought he was gone forever." He looked at her, his gaze so intense it was a physical touch. But he was not gone. He was waiting. You did not just calm the poison in the woods today, Brenna. You calmed him. You gave him a purpose beyond grief. You showed him what it meant to protect again. He fell silent. The space between them hummed with everything left unsaid. He was the king. She was a Null. The bond was an accident of fate, but what stood between them now was a choice. He took a half step forward, then stopped. He held out his hand, palm up, an offering. He did not move closer. He waited. It was the most profound act of respect she had ever been shown. He was giving her the power, the final say. Brenna looked at his hand, strong, scarred, the same hand that had accidentally touched hers and changed her life. The hand that had covered hers to save a dying pup. The hand of the great silver wolf who had stood guard over her. She thought of a life of being unseen, untouched, unvalued. She thought of the fear and the loneliness. And then she thought of this man, this king, who had a grief as vast as her own emptiness, and who had just laid his broken heart at her feet. Slowly, she raised her own hand. She did not hesitate. She placed her palm in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and sure. The bond, which had so often felt like a painful jolt or a taut wire, finally settled. It bloomed between them. Not a searing fire, but a gentle, steady warmth, like the first light of dawn after a long, dark night. It felt like coming home. 2 years passed. The snow fell softly outside the glass walls of the winter garden, each flake a perfect, silent star. Brenna watched them land on the white roses, the ones Valerius had planted for her, their thorny stems now meticulously pruned. She drew the thick, fur-lined cloak tighter around her shoulders, the scent of him, pine and cold mountain air, a comforting presence. At her feet, Soot, now a magnificent, full-grown wolf with a coat like polished jet, sighed in his sleep, his tail thumping once against the heated flagstones. Across the garden, Pip, now a sturdy boy of 8, was chattering at Hakon. The gruff kennel master was attempting to show him how to mend a leather strap, his huge, clumsy fingers making a mess of the delicate work. Pip, with a child's unfiltered honesty, was giving him very direct instructions. "No, not like that, Hakon," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet air. "You are making it worse. Give it here." Hakon grumbled, but he surrendered the strap to the boy's nimble fingers, a look of grudging affection on his face. Brenna smiled. Her strange patchwork family, assembled from the broken and discarded pieces of a kingdom, was whole. A quiet footstep sounded behind her. She did not need to turn. The familiar, warm hum of the bond announced his presence before he ever entered her sight. Valerius came to stand beside her, his hip brushing hers. He was not wearing his crown. He rarely did these days. The lines of grief that had been carved so deeply into his face had softened, replaced by faint lines of laughter around his eyes. He said nothing, simply followed her gaze out to the falling snow. He reached out and gently tucked a stray strand of her hair behind her ear, his fingers warm against the chill of her skin. It was these small gestures, these quiet moments, that formed the bedrock of their life together. They had never needed grand declarations. Their love was a language spoken in shared silence, in a hand reached for in the dark, in the steady, unwavering presence of the other. "Goethe is threatening to make honey cakes," he said, his voice a low murmur against her ear. "She says Pip has been insubordinately charming, and must be rewarded. Brenna's smile widened. And you? Do you find him insubordinately charming? I find him to be a menace to the structural integrity of this castle's dignity, Valerius said, his tone utterly serious, but she could feel the laughter rumbling in his chest. He tried to negotiate for a third pony this morning. They stood together, watching their son instruct their friend, their wolf asleep at their feet, as the snow continued to fall, blanketing their world in a quiet peace. Brenna leaned her head against his shoulder, her anchor, her harbor. The girl who couldn't shift had found her place, not by becoming something else, but by finally being seen for what she had always been. The king who had lost his wolf had found his soul. Their bond was not a cage. It was a sanctuary, a fated refuge they had built together, one quiet moment at a time.